This is 1970s, the birth of New China, a country rising from the ashes of World War II, a Japanese invasion, and a brutal civil war. Finally, the people were united under the leadership of Chairman Mao. The promise was simple: a classless society, equity for all, and a future built on a collective strength of the people. And for a moment, it felt like it might actually work. The streets were filled with Song of Unity, parades of red flags, and the words of Mao printed in the Little Red Book carried by millions like scripture. But that dream didn't last. In 1966, Mao launched what he called the Cultural Revolution, a campaign to purge China of old ideas, old customs, old culture, and old habits. Teachers, scholars, professors, once symbol of authority and respect, now were dragged onto the stages and forced to kneel by the revolutionaries and confess their crimes against the revolution. They were beaten and then publicly humiliated and sometimes even death. These naive young students became the Red Guards, zealots with absolute moral certainty and no restraint of the Maoist philosophies. During that time, universities were shut down. Schools, education were replaced with political ideology, and a lot of infighting within the revolutionaries of who had the more purist Maoist philosophy. And yet, in this madness and chaos, people still had to live out their lives. This is where the story of Coach Jianping Ma begins. Amidst the Cultural Revolution, weightlifting became one of the few ways to escape the chaos. His journey from Mao's China to the Olympic stage of Los Angeles in 1984. It isn't just about sports. It's about survival and what it means to hold on to purpose when the world around you falls apart. Ladies and gentlemen, this is a story of Coach Jianping Ma. Born into a humble family in 1961, Coach Jianping Ma grew up as the middle child in a family of 4. His father was the principal of his local school, and his mother worked at the hospital. And on paper, they were well-respected intellectuals. But under the newly established Communist Party, those titles meant very little. Life back then wasn't governed by how much money you made or what your job titles were, but by ration tickets. Every family was given little slips of paper issued by the government of how much food, clothing, and coal you get. And when Ma entered school in 1967, China was in turmoil. The Cultural Revolution just had begun in 1966. In school, they still taught math and reading, but politics was heavily involved. Teachers had to be careful of what they taught in school, fearing the Red Guards would drag them on stage in a struggle session. Going through school, Ma had been quiet, kept his head down, and focused on his studies. Because at that time, a wrong word could ruin you, and silence was survival. Where he truly came alive was in athletics. Starting out in track and field, he was fast, disciplined, and stronger than all of his peers. However, Ma was a bit short. But then a local coach noticed something others didn't. Ma had short legs, thick build, and explosive power. At 12 years old, Ma began to train Olympic weightlifting. And it was a sport that few had respected. It was seen as a peasant sport, something that would stunt your growth and lead to a lifetime of chronic injuries. His parents, both well-educated, was very unsupportive of his decision. They dreamed of their son becoming a scholar, but during the Cultural Revolution, what choice did you have? The schools were shut down, the universities were closed, and the other option, not too much better, is to join the army. And at that time, Mao Zedong mandated that every high school graduate would need to serve time on the countryside as a farmer because he resented the bourgeoisie class. He wanted to humble all of the Chinese citizens under the Communist Party of China. And even in the army, it was a path that his brother decided to take. At that time, it was full of conflict. The Civil War, Korean War, the Sino-Vietnamese War. So joining the army only promised hardship, uncertainty, and maybe even death. And becoming a weightlifting athlete was a third option. And it was not glorious by any means, but it was his own path. Training was brutal, not for just the intensity, but also in the conditions. His local sports school could only afford to have 2 barbells, which was shared amongst 20 other boys. And dropping weights was forbidden in the training hall, as they didn't have the funds to replace the metal plates or the barbell if it broke. They trained in a cold concrete broken down room with no platform and not even chalk. Instead, they rubbed their sweaty hands on the plaster walls or even the dirty concrete floor. And they lined up single file, one by one, each performing the lift as the others waited impatiently behind them. And after training, he'd walk back home along the river, checking his fishing holes for any swamp eels, turtles, or frogs, whatever he could bring home to his mom to cook. And it was his way to get extra protein that his ration tickets could never supply. And in 1976, Mao's death brought the Cultural Revolution to its end. The Chinese society began to slowly breathe again. And for 15-year-old Ma, it was a moment of a quiet awakening as well. And just after 3 years of training, he had broken the provincial record for the clean and jerk, a feat unheard of for a boy that's still in middle school. His name appeared in his local newspaper. His parents, finally proud of his Olympic weightlifting journey, the Anhui provincial team had offered him a contract. And at last, he started to train in a real weightlifting training hall with real equipment and coaches. Now with belts, shoes, and food, luxuries that he never had before, Ma excelled in his training. Just within a year, his technique and strength surged. He was sent to Guangxi, province near the Vietnamese border, for a special national selection training camp. Over 50 of the top provincial athletes all over from China gathered at the camp, all much older, stronger, and more experienced, but yet Ma's power and composure stood out amongst the rest of them. Just as Ma arrived onto the training base, war broke out between China and Vietnam. Tanks rolled through the streets, soldiers marched towards the border, and gunfire and bombings could be heard from his training hall. There was tension, and most of the athletes there, never being so close to war, was filled with anxiety, but not Ma. His focus never wavered, and every lift, he expressed calm and resilience. The national team coach Zhao Guikai, noticed him immediately. Ma wasn't just any other athlete, but a future champion. And at the young age of 19, Ma was invited to Beijing to join the Chinese national team.
我在北京
Training on the national team was brutal. Although the conditions were much better pay, better food, better equipment, every session was a battle, going lift for lift against his teammates who were just as hungry. At the 1984 Olympic trials in Chengdu, China, Ma faced his fiercest rival yet, his training partner Lin. They both opened the snatch at 120, then 122.5, and the third attempt at 125 kilos. In the third attempt, Ma caught the lift and held his breath, watching Lin's final attempt shortly. Lin pulled the barbell straight over his head, and in the bottom position, just ever so slightly, he had lost his balance, leading him to bail. This is where Ma overtook him by just 2.5 kilos in the snatch session. Ma was so overjoyed of his lead that Coach Zhao had to remind him the job's not done, that overconfidence was a slow and insidious killer. The clean and jerk session was another war. Both opened at 165. Ma's second attempt went a little bit unexpected. When he cleaned the weight, the bar had grazed his neck, and in the jerk dip, and in preparing for the jerk, the bar crushed his neck, leaving him out of breath and lightheaded. He threw the weight up and caught it. And as soon as he got the down signal to drop the weight, he turned around and noticed 2 red lights. The judges had penalized him for his press outs. His rival Lin seized the moment, lifting flawlessly to capture his second attempt. Now Ma and Lin were tied. One last attempt remained. Ma closed his eyes, remembering that cold gym he trained in, the hunger and poverty he faced, and the sacrifices that got him to where he is today. And as the clock ticked down from the 1-minute mark, Ma whispered a prayer, then stepped on stage. He gripped the bar like millions of times he'd done before, his chest up and back tight. First, the clean came smooth, catching it perfectly in the front rack, standing up with ease in preparation for the jerk. The jerk dip on the way down felt like an eternity. And then he exploded up, throwing the weight up like throwing up a prayer. He punched through overhead with the strength unlike any time before, and his feet split, both like anchors. He gathered his feet together, waiting for the down signal, and as he dropped the weight, he turned around and joyously saw 3 white lights. He had guaranteed his Olympic spot. He celebrated with Coach Zhao, and he was so fired up and excited for the Olympic Games. And back in the training hall, he started to push himself harder than ever before in preparation. But fate had other plans. Just 2 months before he was going to be sent off to the Olympics, Ma was maxing out his clean and suffered a severe injury in his rhomboid. The pain in his upper back was unbearable, but Ma stayed silent, fearing that his spot would be replaced. He could barely lie down on his back, and that night he slept on his stomach, hoping the next morning when he wakes up, his injury would be gone. And the next morning, he waited for everyone else in his dorm to get out of bed, to go ahead of him and not see the condition that he was in. Alone, he walked to the communal bathroom to brush his teeth. And then it was at that moment, the pain finally overtook him. He passed out on the bathroom floor. His teammates later found him unconscious, lying on the cold floor. And now everybody knows about his injury. Coach Zhao pulled Ma aside, and Ma faced the reality of the situation. The Olympic spot was not guaranteed, but Coach Zhao still believed in him. He said to Ma that if he showed signs of recovery, of him getting better, of him being able to lift a barbell, he could still compete. And slowly, within a couple of weeks, the team doctor and the physiotherapist slowly nursed Ma back to health. With the weeks leading up to the Olympics, Coach Ma was able to train with very light weights, and he kept quiet, knowing that his coach, teammates, and other officials were watching him diligently. Coach Zhao had done him a solid favor, that he hid his injuries from the higher-ups in fear that they would replace him, knowing Ma had earned his right to compete at the Olympics. When Ma boarded the plane to Los Angeles with his passport and Olympic ID in hand, athletes around him from all different sports buzzed with excitement, yet he remained in his seat, silent. And as the jet engines roared and the plane sped up on the tarmac, the moment the plane took off the ground, the weight of decades of struggle, poverty, sacrifice, and relentless training broke him. Tears streamed down his face, and for that moment he let himself feel it. Joy, relief, and triumph. As the seatbelt signal went off, he wiped the tears off his face, and then joined the others around him in celebration for the Olympics. So thank you so much for watching this video. And this was one of the most personal stories that Coach Ma had told me about his journey to the Los Angeles Olympics, the first ever Olympics under the CCP China that we know of today. It was a very tough journey, very emotional journey that he worked for his life. And it was a memory that he's very fond of. It was a lot to cover. And in a future video, I want to cover his story at the actual Olympics after he lands in America and all the shenanigans that happened then. And this one was very fun because I did a lot of research on the Cultural Revolution of China back in the 70s. And it was an era that my parents grew up in and my grandparents are familiar of. It was very fun. It was very good for me to reflect on my country's culture and history. And not a lot of people, especially Americans, know about the history in China that means so much more to get to where they are today. So once again, thank you for watching this video. And if you enjoyed it, please hit a like and subscribe. And we can help this channel grow. And I'll see you in the next video.